Instead, they wanted a quick trial so they could move on and deal with Biden's agenda. But there's no reason why they couldn't have dealt with the agenda while they had the trial. Spent half the day on the trial and half the day on other business. The problem is these members of Congress work a 3-day work week. And they spend 60-70% of their time when they're in Washington dialing for dollars. You know, the staff does all the work. So, and then we find out, you know, Chris Coons, the senator from Delaware, who's probably a whisperer for Biden, telling the House managers they don't want witnesses. They don't want to drag this out because everybody's got to get home for Valentine's Day. You know, these people just took a dive for Donald Trump. And, you know, Pelosi and Schumer were pushing for that. And the thing I learned last night that I didn't know was that they could have had a secret vote. There's nothing in the Constitution and impeachment process says it has to be a roll call vote. If it had been a secret vote, Trump would have been convicted. But the Democrats chose not to take that path. So Trump's still running free, not accountable. And, you know, the Democrats aren't going to hold him to account. Now, he does face a lot of civil and criminal cases from various jurisdictions. And so he's probably going to be tied up. But you know, I'm mad as hell about that because Trump has got away with this time and time again. The first impeachment was on the narrow issue of using the, you know, trying to get the Ukraine president to help him with his reelection, which was, you know, impeachable in itself. But Trump has a rap sheet a mile long, all kinds of obstruction of justice and abuse of power and self-enrichment and nepotism and so on and so forth. And none of that was brought forward. So that's one issue I want to speak about. And the other is, you know, there's a lot of talk now about what happened down in Texas with their power grid failing. And of course, the right is saying because, well, the wind power generators froze up. They don't freeze up here in New York. Plus, it wasn't just wind. It was coal, gas, and nuclear power instruments froze up. So a lot of those plants went down. And we got to understand, Texas has its own grid. Back in 1935, when the Federal Power Act was adopted, you know, Texas neo-Confederate attitude was, well, we're just not going to sell electricity across state lines, so the Interstate Commerce Commission won't affect us, so we'll just run our stuff in Texas. And then as the local grids integrated into a statewide grid, they set up a statewide grid for Texas, which, because it's isolated from the other grids, reduces its resiliency. And then they had a deregulation in 2002. And so their statewide grid regulator, the ERCOT, the Energy Reliability something, has focused for almost 20 years now on this retail market where, you know, consumers can choose between providers of their electricity, which is a big ripoff because we know the first 10 years, consumers paid $22 billion more than they would have paid if they just stayed with their incumbent utilities. And while Texas has over 70 public power utilities, including Austin, Texas, that's only 15% of the grid. So most of them are investor-owned utilities who own these power plants, which have not invested in what they need to deal with cold weather events like this. So this is a situation where it's why we need public power, you know, publicly owned, democratically controlled, so that the people's interests are put before the profit interests of investors. So don't let anybody tell you it was renewable energy that brought the grid down in Texas. It was years of deregulation and this attitude they don't want federal regulation, and that most of it's privately owned. And they put profits ahead of, instead of investing in infrastructure and upgrading it and making sure it was ready to deal with cold weather events, they've been focusing on setting up this retail market, which is a way of ripping off consumers. So that's what's been on my mind today, Angela. What's been on your mind?
Now that I'm done my dog. Lord have mercy. I am annoyed about a few things. First off, before I start my rant, and I think we should I motion that we have a segment of this live stream just dedicated, and we'll call it "Y'all Ain't Got Nothing Else to Do." And I'll say why, tell y'all why in a minute. But I want to thank everybody who joined us on Saturday for a really dope live stream that we had about community control of the police. I think that it was super informational, and I see a lot of our folks in the chat that were there with us on Saturday. So thank y'all for joining us for that. And Howie and I also want to, since we're talking about what's happening in Texas and Louisiana and Alabama and so many other places that are dealing with weather. I mean, I watched a full-on thunderstorm happen here in South Carolina in February, like a whole thunderstorm. And oh yeah, Jonathan Randall's in the chat for all of the youth that joined me on Saturday as well. So I meant to shout y'all out too. But yeah, there's a whole thunderstorm that happened. We had a tornado touchdown between North and South Carolina. You got snow in Louisiana and Texas. We were up against it. So Howie and I also want to send love to everybody who is being horrendously affected by really unprecedented weather situations. Just know we're thinking about y'all, and we're getting it too, but not like y'all are. So we're watching and hoping that this gets resolved for you really soon. And South Carolina shenanigans, which is why I think we need a piece of this call. Y'all really ain't got nothing else to do. In the middle of climate change and a whole pandemic happening, we have a plague. I read that they're trying to disband in the middle of a plague DHEC, which oversees in the state of South Carolina. There you go. Y'all really ain't got nothing else to do. That's what we calling it. DHEC oversees it's the state health and human services sort of thing. And I read today that there's things in motion to disband DHEC. I mean, who does that? You have a plague. I mean, they're not a perfect organization and a perfect agency. There's oversight issues and things like that. But why would y'all do that now? I mean, come on. And also, folks that are not, just to my South Carolinian family on here, I need y'all to have it on your radar. S1, of course they're coming for abortion. Of course they are, because they have nothing else to do. And we saw this happen in Wisconsin. The whole internal, how can I say this delicately? It's an internal ultrasound used to detect a fetal heartbeat. And what S1 here in South Carolina would do, it is called the South Carolina Fetal Heartbeat Protection from Abortion Act. And it's intended to basically ban abortion after 6 weeks. Now, most of us know, that if you are a pregnant person, a lot of the time, up to 6 weeks, you don't even know you're carrying. So, yeah, Rebecca, that's exactly what it was. And yeah, we had an action against that a long time ago in Wisconsin when they tried the same thing. It is an invasive procedure. But the hot lowlights to know are the House Judiciary Committee here voted 15-8 to pass this bill. One of whom is my representative, who got a really, really zesty email from me today. This was tried in Wisconsin. I'm not gonna go into the details. It's pretty heinous, and it's nothing we have not seen before. So my folks in South Carolina, heads up, and email your whoever calls themselves representing you, the individual that signed on to this, who supposedly represents me, as a Democrat. So I just want people to know that too. Yeah, this wasn't a Republican. This was a Democrat, and he's Black. Which I find particularly offensive, but that's personal. Under this proposal, doctors would be required to use what we understand as a transvaginal ultrasound to attempt to find a fetal heartbeat in the pregnant. And if the pregnancy is not deemed under certain circumstances, doctors would be fined with the possible loss of licensure if they perform an abortion. So there's that. And also here in South Carolina, because they ain't done. Now, we love women. That's the first thing they'll tell you. We're protecting women, but we need to attack trans women to make that happen. So the South Carolina H3477, the Save Women Sports Act. Now, we just saw how much y'all love, pregnant people and people who are capable of supporting pregnancy. So, you're protecting us with this. And it is sitting in committee. It is under consideration currently. It would require public and private middle and high school teams to be designated based on biological sex, which effectively tells our trans youth they are not allowed to compete in sports. This is beyond problematic. It's ridiculous. It is punching down. It's targeting people that you think won't fight you back. And so, I just need this to be on y'all's radar, both S1 here in South Carolina for my South Carolina family that's on here, and also H3477, which will, if it is passed, right now it's under consideration. S1 is expected to go to the governor's desk, and he has already said that he's going to pass that. So that is the end of my rant. I could say a lot of other things, but we ain't got time for all that.
Okay, thank you, Angela. I think that shows Trumpism, the far right, is alive and well. Even though Trump got defeated for president, it was more than him. And along with what Angela's talking about in South Carolina, we got all kinds of voter suppression initiatives going on in the states right now. So this fight is not over. But let's bring on our guest, Cam Gordon, who, as I said, is living proof that Greens do run for local office, contrary to what some people say, and they win. Cam was first elected in 2005. He beat a DFLer, that's the Democratic Party up there, Democratic Farmer Labor Party, 51 to 48%. And after 4 years, he got reelected by 84%. And after 4 more years, by 87%. And then 4 years ago, his fourth time, he got 97%. Nobody ran against him because he's apparently pretty popular in his district. And so Cam is up for re-election this year. And one of our goals is to support local candidates and what they're doing in their cities. So Cam, tell us about this year's campaign, what the issues are, and what people need to know.
I sure will. And this campaign looks a little different than the others because I've already got 3 challengers. As you can imagine, I think coming off the presidential race, but also the pandemic. And also Minneapolis had some really rough days in 2020. That was, you probably all remember the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police officer in our city. And then there was civil unrest after that. So people, I think, are looking at things differently. They're ready to get more active. And there's, I'm the only non-Democrat on the council. And so a lot of people will look at that and say, oh, well, there's an opening for a Democrat to run. Because actually in Minneapolis, almost always, and this isn't always the case because before I got elected, there were 2 Greens on the council, but I've been the only Green on the council since 2006 and would really like to get some more on here. But now we're going to have a race on our hands here, even in Ward 2. Even though I would say that the initiatives I brought forward have been very popular, I think I've also noticed that through the years, when we push something forward like economic justice and the minimum wage, we get other candidates then running in other seats and who want to support that if it's popular. And I have to tell you, Green initiatives tend to be very, very popular. It probably depends on where you are or where you live, but you can find things that will really resonate with the people. And we've done that before. One of the first things I did when I got elected was lead the effort to get ranked choice voting and instant runoff voting in the city. That was incredibly popular, and our neighboring city the Twin City. St. Paul adopted it shortly after that. Same thing with the minimum wage that I helped lead on. So as those things get popular, you also see the other party want to do those things because they see that's how they can get elected. So we're working on some more issues coming forward. I've been talking about changing the city charters so that we had more control of the police department as a city council, like all other departments. Minneapolis is probably not that unusual, but our mayor, that's the one department our mayor has complete authority over in our city charter. So the city council can't even pass policy. So we are trying to break that wide open. We actually want to create a larger department of public safety or community safety. It's got a couple names, but now we have a ballot initiative, and that's going to be on the ballot to change that charter in November, whether it's a citizen petition, but we have the council is also bringing something forward too in case the petition doesn't get the signatures. We're also moving forward with rent control, which in our state, you can't do rent control unless the voters give you that authority. So we're going to put that on the ballot as well. I'd also love to talk to you all a little bit and tell you a little bit about a Minneapolis new Green Deal that I want to do, or a Green New Deal, because we've worked really hard to get our franchise fee. So I tried unsuccessfully to take over the electric company and the natural gas company in our city back in 2015. We weren't able to do that, but we got a lot of attention around it. It was a big campaign, and we have this clean energy partnership, and we were able to get some concessions, including moving our franchise fee separately out of the franchise agreement so the city can raise it on its own. And we've raised it a little bit already to help fund green energy, insulation, those kinds of programs, especially targeted in what we've identified as green zones, where some of the most neglected properties, and to clean those up. We've also identified a social cost of carbon in the city. And we are now looking at, can we adjust our franchise fee so that if it's the gas company, for example, which is all 100% dirty fossil fuels that they're burning, it's a little higher for them. And if we can get the electric company to keep their clean energy coming, we can lower the franchise fee on that, and we can then capture some revenue. But I know that you, Howie, talked a lot about the Green New Deal in the campaign, and also helped craft the whole thing. So I want you to get creative about what could you do on the local level if we could do that. And that's one of the things I'm going to be running on this time. We also declared, the climate crisis an emergency, a public health emergency in our city. So we have everybody's attention, and it seems like people want to be able to do a lot more. And we're kind of flailing about figuring out what to do. And if we can capture some revenue and then reinvest this in green jobs, in green infrastructure, I think we can really make some progress in the future, and really get the attention also of the gas company to change their whole line of business. That's some of what's going on. I do want to advertise the website, and my campaign manager said you should try to raise some funds, because with this opposition coming from the Democrats, and now I think there's 3 in the race, they'll be fundraising a lot too. So www.camgordon.org. Go check out the website, see more about our accomplishments, see more about plans for the future and what we want to do in Minneapolis, and maybe we can help lead the nation in some good things too. I hope every city out there is looking at ranked choice voting, looking at how they can raise their own minimum wage if they can, looking at how they might be able to do rent control, rent stabilization, if you want to call it that, and looking at reforming, transforming, reimagining public safety in your cities.
Well, thank you, Kim. I think you've already been creative on the energy and climate issue. I mean, public power sounds like the campaign failed, but you get public power, and then you have the power to begin creating your own renewable energy sources, and you can prioritize. We know that public power systems generally cost customers 15% less than investor-owned utilities. So there's a consumer angle. And I don't know what the prospects are for that, but I think the social cost of carbon and separating the franchise fee from the franchise contract. Now, I hadn't thought of that, so I think that's a creative idea.
We're probably going to have to grow that franchise fee slowly too. And it's going to be hard to convince folks that they should give the government more for their heat, which most places here get all their heat from the natural gas. But I want to say we maybe failed to municipalize the power companies once, but that doesn't mean it's over. So I'm always looking for a way to point out to these utilities, and they're monopolies here. So there's no alternative in Minnesota. The utility companies get a geographic area and it's theirs unless you create a municipal power company. And most of those got created when the cities were forming because no power company was interested in coming in to help. So we've never seen one switch over. And Minneapolis is very large and very dependent on these big players out there with CenterPoint and Excel. So they're quite the big companies to take on. But I think I'm always looking for a way to point out how these exclusive, profiting utility companies have failed us, and we need to municipalize, and actually even creating small ways to do that, like owning our own solar gardens. And I really hope that we can be investing in our own, outside of the city, probably wind farms too, and then requiring that energy to be transmitted or making an arrangement so that it is brought to us. And that will slowly build this wedge towards, I believe, more democratic control of this. So, and then we can prove that that works out better. So I just didn't want to say we failed once, but I've been here long enough to know that's actually taking the steps towards success eventually. And sometimes it just takes more time and more tries.
Well, one thing public power can do, or maybe this carbon fee, is finance upfront the conversion of homes from gas heating, or if they're using heating oil, to heat pumps. And the problem for the individual consumer is it costs too much up front, and most people can't afford it. But if you amortize that over time, and once it's in, you're saving money. It costs less to pay the electricity for the heat pump than it does for the gas or the oil. And that savings can be used to pay back the investment over time. And a public agency could do that, whether it's a fund created by the carbon fee or a public power system. So that may be one way to talk to the people worried about their bills going up because of the carbon fee.
Do you guys talk much about inclusive financing or this on-bill tariff idea? Because this is something we're trying to do and could work, and it's worked in a few places. And it's actually it's kind of putting a loan on the utility bill. And so you're paying a lot for heating your home, and somebody comes in and says, we will front some money. This could be the government, the utility company, somewhere else. It could be the city in our case. It will reduce your energy bill 50%, but we want to make a deal with you to keep paying 70% so you can help pay back this investment we're going to make in your heat pump or whatever, and the insulation we're going to put in and those things. So you can prove the investment's going to save you money, and you can actually save enough to save on your bill and pay back some of this. So we've been wrestling with our Public Utilities Commission at the state and others to allow us to do this program with our utility companies. But I would encourage other folks to look at it. I think it's had some success out on the East Coast. Pay as you go is one of the names for it. So people can look that up if they want to. I'm sure they could find some links to that. But it's inclusive financing. And I actually think we could team that up with the franchise fee. I love that idea. And I think those heat pumps are a great option. And I would like us to go to some of the the on-bill kind of paying for it helps renters actually want to make investments, and the landlords don't have to get so involved, because we have a lot of trouble with rental properties getting landlords interested in making big investments because they're not paying a lot of their bills, especially their heat bill. They usually leave that on the tenant, and the tenant doesn't want to put money into a building that they're not using, but if they could see their energy costs go down right away, they might do that. But that is that is very interesting to think about how we could use the franchise fee to do something as big as that, or create a district energy system where we use, the geothermal on a larger area for a whole block. And we've also talked about how could you put pipes under streets when you're reconstructing streets, and then everybody could benefit from that too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't heard it called inclusive financing, but we actually got a bill passed in New York. It's called Green Homes, Green Jobs. And these investments in retrofits like heat pumps or efficiency or solar panels could be paid off, and it's put on your utility bill. The problem was, it's been around 10 years. The utility companies were not cooperative, and the state didn't implement the program vigorously. So instead of a projected, I forget what the number was, 1 million homes, we got like 10,000 homes. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Getting the law passed is only half the battle. Then you got to make sure it's implemented.
So I just looked it up, and it's called Pay As You Save. Just want to let folks know I gave you the wrong name.
Yeah, that's a better name for it.
Yeah. So the man behind the screen may put some questions up on the screen. Here we go. Luker Denouncer. Does CAM work to expand worker ownership in cooperatives? Could you say that again?
Does CAM work to expand worker ownership in cooperatives? Should be on your screen. Whoop, there it is.
Definitely. So we actually started, we had this small business technical assistance program for the longest time, and they would offer technical assistance, but the only thing they ever knew or thought about was the sole proprietorship or limited, LLC or something. And there were people who were interested in starting cooperatives and wanted to know how to do that. And we've actually got quite a cooperative movement in Minneapolis, where some of the early food co-ops were started in the 60s and 70s. And we've actually, before that, we've had cooperatives that we had a dairy that was a cooperatively run and owned. So we started having technical assistance and training available for folks who wanted to start cooperatives and kind of building that out. And we have a growing cooperative economy here. We've also got housing cooperatives, and we're trying to develop those too. It's an absolutely fantastic, model, and it works really well. And sometimes it's much easier to do than people think. And with a little technical assistance from the government, from the city, people can do that. We also do some loans and some financial incentives that help cooperatives. And we've been having some success with that too.
Hey, Jennifer, one of our green family. Private monopolies like Con Edison suggest an upcharge for renewable energy. I saw this in the chat. It's not community-controlled energy, but they are trying to be greenwashing. What do you do about that?
An upcharge, does that mean they actually charge more for it?
I think that's what it means.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah. And I've seen that before.
They do that in Minneapolis too. So you can pay a little bit more and then think that you're getting your energy from wind power. And they will, it's the electrons are all flowing in here, but they say you're investing now in wind. And even though we think it's probably cheaper to actually produce it, people are paying more to get that. We have a commitment to go with 100% renewable electricity, at least in the city as a whole, but also for the city enterprise. So all our buildings and fire stations and all of the energy that we need, we want to come from 100% renewable. So the electric company basically said, we'll guarantee that you're getting just renewable energy, and they wanted to give us a big surcharge. We're saying we're going to go off and try to get our own power plants to do that. But I think the upcharging is probably a bad idea. And we're also getting the gas company to want to follow along. Now they're talking about green natural gas, because they'll capture some methane, and there's other ways to do it, and they'll mix it in with the natural gas somehow, and that's greener because they'll capture it from waste and garbage and those kinds of things. That's really not the way we want to go. But then they also want to be able to charge more for it. I think it's kind of a big scam, but I'm not sure what Jennifer thinks, but I'd be suspicious of it, and it doesn't always cost more, although we want to be willing to invest in clean energy too.
And truly clean energy. I mean, continuing practices like fracking, but then, hey, we're also harvesting methane. Dog, no, it's like you're missing the point. And it's also insulting our intelligence. This is not what we're asking for. So you're absolutely right about that.
Somebody asked about parking ramps, and we have a couple really big parking ramps downtown, and we've put solar on top of some of that, a large section of it. I think that it's a great idea. It's good on tops of buildings too, but doing it on parking structures, yeah, there's the question now. I agree. It's already helping. We have got it as a community solar garden, so people can subscribe to it. I want to do one that the city actually owns on some of those ramps too. So thanks, Jonathan.
Hey, Amy. Hey, darling. Question, Mr. Gordon, any progress with police accountability where you are? Or has Biden's election stalled that out? Good question.
I think there has been some progress. There's still a really big discussion going on. I talked a little bit about this charter amendment that could help. We do have a police oversight ordinance that years ago was really weakened. The state law is not very supportive to it, but I'm moving forward trying to amend it so that there's just a little bit much. We've got a lot of challenges the way it's structured here because the mayor is in charge of all discipline, usually delegates it to the chief. Then the police chief has a really strong union, and that's really challenging. There's a lot of strange dynamics with the police. And any city department, you want your employees to respect you, to feel like you support them, and you'll work together. Since the killing of George Floyd, we've actually had, and the civil unrest, we've had 150 of our officers, which is a good chunk. We had 800 some. They have quit, and I could see why they might not want to keep working under those conditions, but that's put strain on us. So we've actually had a kind of and across the country, there's been a surge of crime and I think increases in a lot of cities. So there has been here as well. So mostly what slowed us down is the law and order faction and citizens have kind of risen up and said, we need to support our police and do more. And it's kind of a generational divide too. It's very interesting. So we're kind of in the wrestling match about where to go with this. I think there's a really big consensus. You need to end the racism that's infected the police and the long history. Something's wrong with it. But this charter amendment, if it passes, will really be a big factor saying how much consensus there is, because that's really, there's a lot of support from a lot of different factions who want police transformation, who are thinking this could be the avenue to get there. So we'll see. I don't know if the election of Biden has really stalled it out much or not, because I think we were already so wrapped up in it ourselves. I could think that's a little bit irrelevant, but I guess we'll see. It could make a really big difference if the federal government or even the state government pushed more for making reforms, but I don't expect that necessarily. Police unions are really, or our police union, it's called a federation. It's not a real union. I support labor organizing and unions, but it's one of those unions that to be a member, you have to work for the Minneapolis Police Department. It's not like most unions where they're represented across different companies or enterprises. So it's a small group, and it's really seems to have a culture of protect your own no matter what.
Hey, Andy. Andy Messick. What advice would you have for anyone who wants to run for office as a Green, and what lessons have you learned running your elections?
One of the big pieces of advice I would give is get active in your community. Make sure you really care about and love the people of your community. That's really critical. And if it's not a good fit for you, you might want to consider relocating somewhere where you resonate better and you really feel this caring or about your community. That makes a really big difference. And then I recommend getting involved in some stuff lets you test that out. You can also see how good you are at maybe building consensus or support or supporting or buying into those ideas of your neighbors in your community in the area there. And you can see how that works. It also gives you some credibility for later. So I would say try to play a long game and, move somewhere where you think your values are like the community's values. That might be a way to look at it. It really makes a big difference. And you're going to be much better if you care about the people you represent once you get elected too. And people can feel that. And it's really interesting, at least in local politics, but probably everywhere. Sometimes that kind of relationship or the fact that they think you're concerned and you care about their welfare is more important than if you maybe think, you should ban smoking everywhere or whatever. They'll overlook some of that stuff and they'll think, well, this person really cares about me. They understand me and they're going to work really hard. But I would recommend that and start small and have a long game. I guess I can't say a lot more right now, but I'm happy to answer more questions too.
I really love this question, Eric. Hey, Eric, darling. Eric Gray is asking, Mr. Gordon, do you have a plan for community control of education for your city, as well as creating pipelines for more community-based leadership?
It's interesting in Minneapolis because we have an independent school board that's separate from the city. And I've not been as invested in reforming the schools, especially since my youngest graduated. So I was very involved and engaged and would be on the PTAs and would be very involved for a long time. And that I think is a great place to build some leadership, or parent teacher councils or whatever they're calling those for the schools. It's kind of in my role on the city council to take a little bit of an arm's length from the schools, although I can play a pretty big role from my constituents who raise things up to me. Then I can go back to school board members and even the superintendent and say, we're really concerned about that. And I tend to focus more on the schools in my ward and trying to represent the families there. We've got an interesting system of neighborhood organizations here and also small business associations. But in terms of developing some of that leadership, those neighborhood organizations, but also other community organizations, and sometimes they're bigger activist groups, is really a great place for folks to build leadership and have support. And one of the best things that I get to do sometimes is take some of those ideas and say, all right, let's look at the city bureaucracy. And, that idea fits perfectly with my goals and values. Let's champion that and see if we can change a law or get a new city policy. And a lot of them don't have to do with the schools again, because I don't get to set school policy. But we've made a lot of changes, and only because really people wanted to. We ended up with a whole local foods movement, and we ended up legalizing commercial growing in the city, allowing bees, opening it up more for chickens and all this urban agriculture, because there were some community leaders that wanted to do it and came in and asked about it and were willing to put work into it. So that's really a key. And, we talk about grassroots democracy, and we can talk about instant run of voting and election reform. But really, once you're an elected official, you can practice grassroots democracy by going out and talking to the people that you represent and others, and letting your door be their door into government change and into policy change. And it can be exciting. So try to do some of that. You can kind of organize people to show up to and participate. You can go to the next question. I probably talked too much.
You don't talk too much at all. Everything that you're saying is what people want to hear. That's why you're here. So don't ever worry about that.
All right.
Mr.
Can we go to midnight?
Huh?
Can we go to midnight? I'm just kidding.
Hey. Mr. Anderson, one of our darlings, wants to know, how is the public transportation? I'm just gonna jump in because the union ATU is Amalgamated Transit Union, that local that runs Minneapolis. Shouts out to, I want to say y'all are local 1005. Don't quote me on that. Sending y'all big love. Y'all have a sexy transit system. I considered going to Minneapolis simply because I could operate the train and be part of the same union I was in Milwaukee. So I'm just shouting that out. So how is public transportation? Is sexy. What are your thoughts on moving toward things like electrical buses and what can?
Well, we'd welcome you here anytime. So that's it. You could come here, and hopefully we're building out even more transit. I'm really a big fan of electric buses. In fact, I think we need to electrify more of the city-owned vehicles, and we're working on that and pushing towards that. But we have done some of that, and we have some bus routes that are all electric, might run through downtown. We are also pushing hard for bus rapid transit, we call it, which really works well and kind of mimics the light rail. So we have 2 light rail lines, and we're building a bigger extension. Really big investment in light rail, really expensive, but really works well, really helps kind of guide development where it goes. I would actually like to see some streetcars finishing it out, which is kind of like what bus rapid transit can build out, although streetcars are even more reliable and dependable. We used to have an amazing network in the Twin Cities of streetcars, late 1800s, till I think they were bought out by the tire company or something like that. You can imagine how that went because they were private, and we lost some. But you can still see how the city developed and the little nodes where there were stations, kind of helping complete neighborhoods. It could be formed, the mom and pop shops, but a big advocate of that, and excited to see some extensions on our light rail. That's an area where we could really use some funding at the bigger level, like the federal government level, to come in. In fact, where was that high-speed rail that we were going to get so long ago? I think that was a part of a stimulus package from Obama or something. We want that train to Milwaukee and to Chicago that we can use too. But that's a little bit above and beyond this. I'd like the entire system to be electric someday, and we're pushing it in that direction. It isn't yet. It's also an expensive thing, but I would love to see ways that we could have it so it's free for people to use. I think that would increase ridership enormously. And of course, it wouldn't really be free, but we'd all be pitching in to pay for it together. And when you got on the bus, you'd say, hey, I've been paying for that off of whatever tax you were or people are, and I can still use that. So that's a push that we're having. We actually were able to get the school district to give all their high school students a bus pass that they could use 24/7 because they were willing to quit spending money on big orange buses for high schoolers that were congesting the roads and polluting the air and driving all over. And that was really a big step. And it made me start to wonder, what if we made some kind of contract and say all Minneapolis residents, could we get them each a pass transit company, and what would that cost? And wouldn't that be great and be a benefit of living in the city? But we aren't there yet. But the fact that the high school and the school district was able to do it gave me hope that, oh, you could do that in the bigger pieces. And also a side benefit is you get the 9th and 10th graders used to riding the buses and realizing it works and they can do it. They're more likely to keep doing it into adulthood too.
Yeah, I know that the trolley systems were destroyed by a conspiracy of not just Firestone, but GM, Greyhound, and it happened in the 30s. They were convicted after World War II. And as I recall, they were convicted, but then they got a slap on the wrist. Like GM had to pay $5,000. And the officers at the center of the conspiracy, the corporate executives, paid $5. And then that was it, And so what they did was tear up the trolleys, and turn them over to Greyhound bus systems. And it was all about the automobile, oil, and tire companies basically having the trolleys disappear as competition. But I don't know if you can see it. I got a map right there. Well, right by Howie and Angela, just to the left on your screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, read it. That's a 1903 map of the trolley system in Syracuse. And there were trolley lines within 2 blocks of every residence, and they ran every 15 minutes. 1903. And we can't run a transportation system today. It really just shows how far we've fallen from a responsive government, particularly at the local level.
And just thinking about in Milwaukee, the giant fight over, a lot of the streetcar rails are still in the roads. A lot of them were torn up during World War II, from what I understand, and used for like scrap metal and all that. There's a lot of places where they're still in the road. And just thinking of, that stimulus money that you mentioned, Cam, and what happened in Wisconsin, who received a piece of that, and the fact that former Governor Scott Walker, to please his Tea Party folks, sent that money back to the federal government, where it was given to states like Illinois and other states. They were like, thanks, Wisconsin. And the whole debacle behind that. But everything that you just said is what we discussed in Milwaukee as far as fighting for transit, to get light rail, to get streetcars, fighting for multimodal transit, fighting for, funding and things like that. So that visionary stuff you just put forward was music to my ears. Hey, darling. Rob D. Rich, what are you guys doing to protect voters and stop voter suppression? And I'm going to assume that's for Minneapolis.
Okay. Yeah, we work really hard. So we have our own elections department. It's not run by the county in Minneapolis, and they actually work directly for the city. And so we manage them directly. And the whole issue of how to make it easy to vote, especially we did a lot during COVID, as you can imagine. So we had, you could pull up in your car and you could drop off your ballot there and people would come out and pick it up. We have early voting now that goes on for a long time. We've done more mail-in voting than we've ever done before. It's still kind of called absentee voting, but it's no excuse absentee. So it's really just early voting. And we encourage everybody, you can do that if you want to. Some people still like to show up, including me. I get a kick out of showing up on election day and casting my ballot right there. So I did do that. But we got a lot of people that were able to do that and a lot of outreach. We actually also send out a mailing to everybody's house, every address that we have, to remind them about the election every year and talk about what's on the ballot. It doesn't go into a lot of depth. I might wish it went into a little more depth about what the issues are or who the candidates are, but they can see what their ballot's going to be, so they could even work on it ahead of time and bring it into the election place and use their notes so they can vote the way that they want to. We probably could have had more early voting centers, but we had several, and I thought that was really a big plus. We've also really tried to make sure that the polling places on election day are evenly distributed, and there's not a long wait, and people aren't waiting outside, so they can get in and they can vote easily. We probably had a little more kind of eyes open around this time, because we were concerned about people coming out and maybe being intimidating folks when they voted. But we had a very high voter turnout, and I don't think we have very many examples of voter suppression in Minneapolis.
Well, I want to speak generally. I mean, we're opposing all these voter suppression laws where they purge voter rolls. They have ridiculous ID requirements. I think one bill in one legislation requires 2 forms of photo ID. One of them proposes you have a notarized statement to get your absentee ballot. This is all designed to discourage people from voting. And for the Green Party, I mean, we got to issue, it's mostly Republicans pushing the voter suppression I just described, but the Democratic Party has their own form of voter suppression, and that's party suppression. So we know from 2016 that 61% of Jill Stein's voters wouldn't have voted if she wasn't on the ballot. And you plug that into Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, wouldn't have changed the outcome. In fact, it was the Green Party in Detroit that was trying to get 75,000 ballots that weren't counted, mostly would have been for Clinton, would have flipped the election. We didn't have standing as Greens because if we'd have got all those votes, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. But Hillary Clinton's campaign did, and they declined to take standing and get those ballots counted. And then they turn around and blame us. So we got issues like in New York. They tripled the votes we need to stay on the ballot, tripled the number of signatures we need to get on the ballot, 45,000 in 6 weeks. And then we got things happening like right now. Legislation's going through the state legislature, the Democrat sponsored, that reduces by 70% due to COVID the number of signatures the major parties need for designating petitions. And they need a lot less signatures than we do now as independent candidates because we don't have a ballot line. And they're not lowering the number of signatures we need to get in our independent nominating petitions. And I could go on, but let me just put it this way. You want to run as an independent because you don't have a ballot line for Congress in the United States. In most states, it's thousands or tens of thousands of signatures. You want to do it in the United Kingdom, it's 10 signatures. You want to do it in Canada, it's 100 signatures or 50 in the rural ridings. It's 2 signatures in New Zealand. In this country, it's thousands or tens of thousands. So when the Green Party suppressed, a lot of our people won't come out and vote because they don't like the other 2 candidates. And that's a form of voter suppression as well that we're fighting.
So yeah, we definitely have candidate and difficulty with ballot access in terms of the party. So basically, you have to run as if you were an independent. So if you're now not for city council, it's considered nonpartisan. You do have to pay a filing fee, or you can collect signatures for that, but that counts for everybody. But for state legislature and of course for Congress and for federal office, it's considered partisan. And if you're running with the major parties, you don't need any signatures, but you do need to collect signatures, like you were saying, Howie, if you want to run as a Green. It's much harder to recruit candidates when we don't have that. Our major party status forces us to run state to try to get that, and we had it for a while and we lost it. It forces us to run statewide and try to get 5% of the vote for a statewide office. There aren't that many of them. President and vice president count, thank you. Senators count, and then we have 6 constitutional officers. Well, sometimes we want to spend our time growing the party from the grassroots up, and we want to build candidates for those offices, but we get stuck in this strategy of, well, we still need to run. And you can be a minor party, which means you get some money from a tax checkoff from the state. If you have 1%, and then you're just a non-party, you're a political action committee if you're under that. So you don't get any funding. You can't participate in contribution refund programs. So I think it's 2% to be a major party in Iowa. It would be nice if we could change that, but everybody's so used to it here at being at that 5% level. And I know it's a mishmash across the whole country about ballot access, but they definitely do like to keep the alternative parties off the ballot.
How many signatures?
We did fight voter ID here, and we kept it from coming forward. They did try to pass it, but they haven't yet, and I don't think they'll come back for a while.
How many signatures do you need to get on the ballot for your ward race?
I think it's 2,000.
Wow. You run for a local city council race. And if you want to run for the national parliament in the UK, it's 10. I didn't mention India. It's 2. Australia, it's 50. And here to run for local office, it's like Moscow, where all the opposition candidates were eliminated by petition signatures.
I should double check that. I might be thinking of running for when we collected petitions for you or for Congress, but so maybe it's less than that, but I'll see.
Well, I can tell you district races in Syracuse, it's about 500. And, you know, in my district,
500.
there are about 2,000, 2,500 vote in those races. It's a pretty steep standard.
We're getting the cane in the pride. Yeah, we got the cane. So Cam, go ahead and plug anything you want to plug. Let the folks know how to find you, how to support you, and whatever else you need to throw at them right now.
Well, thanks so much for doing this and for inviting me to be here. I really want to encourage folks out there, if they're thinking about running, to try it, and encourage you to find candidates that you can support, get organized in your community. I could really use your help. If you have any extra change to send my way, you can send it to camgordon.org, and it's right there on the screen. Could really make a big difference. If folks want to reach me, they can reach me at cam@camgordon.org and send me an email, and I'd be happy to talk and share ideas and give advice with you all out there. I really can make a difference. Just running raises issues, but a library board, a park board, a school board, a neighborhood association, all of those things, get elected. Remember to carry your values. I have to tell you that the Green Party values not only help me make better decisions about what the policy should be, but they also really help me be a better elected official when I use them to determine how I get to those policies. So grassroots democracy, respect for diversity, feminism really makes a difference as you're thinking about how are you going to make decisions, how are you going to include people. And so don't forget that either. I think that it's really a good guide, and I hope that we can keep those values alive and push them into this society more and more, and into every city and every neighborhood and every state out there.
Well, thank you, Cam.
So much.
I think you're a living example of what the Greens preach. And even though a lot of people think they only see us when we run for president, the real action where we're making a difference is in these local races. You know, Judge Brandeis once said, the states are the laboratories of democracy where we get to try out and demonstrate new ideas. I think he's wrong. It's really the cities where we have much more access. And I hope, people listening in Greens will follow Cam's example, because, at the city level, in this country, we have a lot of power at the municipal level. We can tax, we got procurement, we set budgets, policies. We have the right of eminent domain. We can take over private enterprises and make them municipal enterprises. So, really, the only thing limiting that is when we start doing stuff, the major parties at the state level try to preempt our powers. But, every time you make advances, they fight back, and then we got to fight back. So thank you, Cam, for coming on. I think people learned a lot.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Good luck in your campaign, and I'm going to send you a donation, no doubt.
Thank you so much.
So, Angela, any last words?
Well, I want to do a shout out. My homie, Rebecca Kimball, who is running for Madison Common Council, was in the chat. Their primary was today. The police union hates her, so that should tell y'all what a dope candidate she is. So I'm sending her big love. Her and Nikki both, who are running up there. And y'all definitely support Cam, and he's doing the thing in a city that can show a lot as far as leading by being progressive. So y'all give him some love. And as far as my own last thoughts, y'all just stay safe. This weather is getting wild this week. I know y'all hear Howie and I say this every week. Y'all gonna hear it a million times more. We mean it. Stay safe. You know, there's a whole pandemic happening. There is wild weather. There's a lot going on. So y'all just keep your physical health up as much as you are able to. Hold your mental health up as much as you are able to. It's very hard. This is a rough timeline to be living in. Do the best that you can, and just know that you're not, battling all of this by yourself. So, big love. What you got, Howie?
Well, I don't want people to be discouraged because we got rid of Trump, but Trumpism's still out there. If the Senate doesn't get rid of the filibuster, even Biden's modest program is going to be so compromised, it's not going to be worth that much. And the climate crisis continues. Inequality is extreme and growing. People are facing evictions, having trouble putting food on their table, accessing health care in the middle of a pandemic. All this can get people depressed. And then you look overseas, and Biden is continuing a lot of Trump's policies. He's backing a dictator in Haiti. He's putting conditions on getting back into the Iran nuclear deal. Basically, he's saying they got to stop enriching uranium, which actually they're allowed to do under the deal. It's just a question of volume. And Iran's saying, well, you got to lift the sanctions first. So that's going nowhere. And we can go around the world. We just had a bombing in the Kurdish region of Iraq, and and then another incident in Afghanistan. So they're saying we're going to stay, as if we've been able to stabilize things by being there. We destabilize things by being there. So people can get depressed, but I think where we can make advances is in local elections and local policy, and show what the Greens can do. And I think, as I've said, ranked choice voting is an idea whose time has come. There are campaigns going on in 20 states now. We got 6 more cities, bringing it up to 38, and another state bringing it up to 2 in 2020. And if we can get that, then that ends that lesser evil dynamic where progressives vote for the centrist Democrat to stop the far-right Republican. Now people can vote for the left. And the Democrats can't take us for granted. They can't even take their own progressives for granted because they got an exit strategy or threat. So that's a game changer. So I think, don't get discouraged. There's a lot we can do. And I'll just add to what Angela said. Be safe, take care of yourself. This pandemic is still getting people. We just had a local Green here. We had a meeting tonight, one of these Zoom meetings, and she was sick as a dog. She got COVID. So, don't let that happen to you. So everybody, have a good night, and thanks for listening.